there's a lot that we don't talk about, sometimes due to embarrassment, fear, insecurities. We neglect discussions about the most common parts of our lives, things we all deal with, sometimes every day. But on the Caffeinated Gypsy podcast, together, we'll break all of those taboos and talk open and honest about shared experiences. Knowledgeable people relating things you felt but never put into words. Parenting, sex, fitness, energy, anything to connect you to your authentic self, unfiltered. Now, the Caffeinated Gypsy herself, a free spirit, world traveler with a passion for fitness and exploring topics that others might avoid. Hello and welcome to the Caffeinated Gypsy podcast. I'm Stephanie Cotton, your host. All right, as promised, you guys, if you are following my Instagram, I talked a little bit last week about this transit we have with the Venus and Pisces. So this isn't going to be a super long one today, but I did want to jump on here and talk about this a little bit because it's definitely affecting people. So this transit started March 26th and it's going to run through April 20th. So we have a couple more weeks of this. And I wanted to mention this because what I'm seeing a lot of right now is people are really feeling things passionately about people, which is so good. But with this transit, let's just talk a little bit about like what they do with each other, Venus and Pisces. So Venus is what rules our love. This is what rules our relationships with people. It also rules a lot about like how we feel about ourselves. And so that's why for most of us, when we aren't receiving the love that we deserve or people aren't treating us well, it really affects our self-esteem because a lot of our self-esteem can be wrapped up in how much love we're receiving. And when we look at Pisces, Pisces is ruled by Neptune. So this is our dreamlike state. This is the unknown. This can sometimes be our delusion. It's just very watery. So when we take both of these and we put them together, what we have is maybe a little bit of delusion when it comes to love. And so what you find is that people become almost like punch drunk in love. So this is where you start looking at people and you're just, have those rose-colored glasses on and we just can't see what's really happening, especially if this is like new relationships. These are people that you're just meeting. And this can happen in friendship as well. It's not just like intimate relationships. It could be like maybe you've met somebody and you've been longing for like friendship and you're just like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this person. And you're on that like love high or that like high of a new relationship. So the problem with this right now is that we have Pisces in the mix. And so Venus and Pisces, they actually really like each other. Venus is exalted in Pisces. They're really good friends. But the reason for this is that they both kind of like to be in those dreamy, happy states, right? Which is fine when it's we have other aspects that are supporting that. But what happens with Pisces is it can get a little bit convoluted. And this is where we start looking at people and we start seeing what we want to see in them. So when we look at a transit like this, I always encourage people to really just use caution. We also have some other aspects happening right now. We have this new moon happening in a couple of days in Aries. And so we're really focusing on ourselves. We're in Aries right now and it's a sun sign. So we're really being called to take action on ourselves right now. And so this can kind of deter you a little bit. And so I want to encourage you to think about that before you jump head over heels. This could be an area where we jump in so that we're distracted. Okay. And so right now our focus is really supposed to be on ourselves. If you've listened to any of my other podcasts, that's all I'm talking about right now is self, because we are really being called to step up and step into ourselves. And it's really hard to step into yourself when you're stepping into another person. And so with this transit, it's very easy to get caught up in somebody else, to get caught up in the idea of somebody else. But what you're going to find is that if you're getting caught up and it's not necessarily like the reality of who that person is, maybe you're not compatible, and maybe we're repeating some old patterns, because right now everything's kind of out there, right? Like everything's starting to be illuminated that we need to work on. And so when this happens, what a lot of times happens is old patterns start to creep back in, because we have to address them and we need to really address the underlying cause. So especially if you have a habitual pattern of maybe getting into relationships with people that aren't good for you, this is a time to recognize that and maybe put the brakes on a little bit and go, okay, let's back up a little bit. Let's see, have I done the work that I need to repair this habit that I keep having? So if you're listening and you're like, I always end up in, narcissistic relationships with people, and you meet this person right now, but you don't know why you always end up in these narcissistic relationships, this is the time to go, okay, I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to back up a little bit. And yes, this feels really good, right? Because we get those dopamine hits, like our adrenaline's running, like we're excited. Everything feels really good. But it's only momentarily, right? Because what happens when we come down from that like high? Well, we usually crash. And then we're like, what the hell? Like, why did I do this again? So now we know this is like an astrological thing happening right now. So we can be aware of that. So we're going to be looking at this transit until April 20th. So this is my advice for you. If you're pursuing a relationship, if you're especially new relationships of any form, and you're just like, punch drunk, happy, in love. I'm not saying that it is a bad thing. I'm saying be cautious. Don't go in 100% until maybe after the 20th. And then if you're still feeling like this, like mid-April, go for it. And if you're still working through your stuff and you know that relationship stuff is one of your things, and you haven't actually done the work to repair it, just maybe take a step back. Because here's the thing, guys. What I see a lot of with people is instead of like working on our own stuff, we jump to other people to try to like fill that void. Nothing will fill that void. Especially if you're in the sign of Pisces, all my like Pisces listeners, you're going to feel this one extra hard. And if you're a Pisces, if you have a Pisces in Venus, if you have a Pisces in Sun, rising, moon, even Mercury, you're going to feel this so much stronger. And what's going to happen, if you know Pisces, that's really good until it's really bad. And then you're going to be in the pits of despair. And we're going to see depression. We're going to see neuroses. We're going to see all of this underside, or the less appealing aspects of Pisces are going to start to come out. So I want you to think about that. If you're one of those people that tends to kind of like jump from person to person, I really want to emphasize that, because you're going to feel the effects of that, and you're probably going to end up having serious depression, some serious regret from engaging in those relationships right now. So just take a step back. Like if it's the person you're supposed to be with, they're going to be there. If they're not supposed to be in your life, then they're not going to stay. And that's kind of what we need to have happen. What we really, really need to be focusing on right now is more self and less other people. And I think this is just like a habitual problem that we have in the world in general right now, as people just jump from person to person to person trying to fulfill their needs. People even use it as a distraction. And the thing is that if you really want to step into your true self, if you really want to do any type of work that requires helping other people, you have to do your own work first. And I know that's kind of like icky, but honestly, no person's going to fix you. And you're really doing that person a disservice. You're doing yourself a disservice if you're focusing on other people while you're still in the midst of like healing yourself. And I'm telling you guys right now, we're being called to just work on self. So keep this transit in mind. The other side to this is if you're not engaged in relationships, maybe you're not really pursuing that, what you could also start to see is just a little bit of like suffering or silent suffering, depression. These are things that kind of start to creep in, especially if maybe your relationship's not very good. Maybe if you're not in a relationship, but you want to be in a relationship. The flip side to this is you feel really sad because you don't have that connection, or you don't have a loving relationship with somebody. And so know that if you start having these types of feelings, this is going to pass. But once again, really pay attention right now. If you listen to anything that I talk about right now, we're really prime to paying attention to our higher self. We have Mercury is square with Neptune right now. And so it's really allowing us to get these messages. So if you're feeling this way, maybe take that energy and go, okay, but why do I feel this despair? Why do I have this depression? What can I do to start correcting this so I can start attracting happy, healthy relationships into my life? Because we all want to have those. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to connect with people. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be in loving relationships with people. Like, this is completely natural. But the problem is that if we don't actually work on our stuff first, our vibration doesn't usually attract that. And if it does attract it, it requires both people to do a lot of healing. And so if we can start with just working on ourselves, then it's so much easier to attract the right people. So use this opportunity from now until April 20th to maybe look at some underlying patterns, maybe some delusional thinking that we've had in terms of relationships. Maybe start looking at what is your go-to. Like, do you just jump from person to person to person? Do you jump to maybe just having like physical relationships with people instead of maybe working on some of those underlying issues, so you can get that instant gratification? Because the new relationship is the fun part, right? That's where we get those dopamine hits. That's where we have that instant gratification. But as we all know, once the newness wears off, that all goes away. And it really can leave us feeling really crappy. So my advice for everybody is, during this transit, really just take your time, guys. Don't jump into anything with people. Just be very consciously aware. And if you do find yourself slipping into it, just be like, okay, I did that. Lesson learned. So if you are in the midst of this right now, just take this as a lesson, because these are all lessons, and that's totally okay. We get there when we get there. It's not a judgment. It's just knowing like, okay, this is where you're at, and it's going to be a little bit of heartache maybe if we don't start correcting those patterns. All right. Good luck with this transit, you guys. Really take away what you can from this, because there's no such thing as a bad transit. This can open you up to having a lot of really healthy relationships in the future if you pay attention to this transit and you do the work that's needed. All right, till the next one.
For all the people who judge without knowing, just throw the peace on, tell them good vibes only you.